and aggressive pay a social price, unpopularity, and isolation. These values of harmony and cooperation are perpetuated in subtle and not so subtle ways through books on how to be successful in life, through the pleasant, peaceful exteriors that those who have gotten ahead in the world present to the public, through notions of correctness that saturate the public space. The problem for us is that we are trained and prepared for peace, and we are not at all prepared for what confronts us in the real world: war. This war exists on several levels. Most obviously, we have our rivals on the other side. The world has become increasingly competitive and nasty. In politics, business, even the arts, we face opponents who will do almost anything to gain an edge. More troubling and complex, however, are the battles we face with those who are supposedly on our side. There are those who outwardly play the team game, who act very friendly and agreeable, but who sabotage us behind the scenes, use the group to promote their own agenda. Others, more difficult to spot, play subtle games of passive aggression, offering help that never comes, instilling guilt as a secret weapon. On the surface, everything seems peaceful enough, but just below it, it is every man and woman for him or herself. This dynamic infecting even families and relationships. The culture may deny this reality and promote a gentler picture, but we know it and feel it in our battle scars. It is not that we and our colleagues are ignoble creatures who fail to live up to ideals of peace and selflessness, but that we cannot help the way we are. We have aggressive impulses that are impossible to ignore or repress. In the past, individuals could expect a group, the state, an extended family, a company, to take care of them. But this is no longer the case, and in this uncaring world, we have to think first and foremost of ourselves and our interests. What we need are not impossible and inhuman ideals of peace and cooperation to live up to, and the confusion that brings us, but rather practical knowledge on how to deal with conflict and the daily battles we face. And this knowledge is not about how to be more forceful in getting what we want or defending ourselves, but rather how to be more rational and strategic when it comes to conflict, channeling our aggressive impulses instead of denying or repressing them. If there is an ideal to aim for, it should be that of the strategic warrior, the man or woman who manages difficult situations and people through deft and intelligent maneuver. Our successes and failures in life can be traced to how well or how badly we deal with the inevitable conflicts that confront us in society. The common ways that people deal with them: trying to avoid all conflict, getting emotional and lashing out, turning sly and manipulative, are all counterproductive in the long run, because they are not under conscious and rational control, and often make the situation worse. Strategic warriors operate much differently. They think ahead toward their long-term goals, decide which fights to avoid and which are inevitable, know how to control and channel their emotions. When forced to fight, they do so with indirection and subtle maneuver, making their manipulations hard to trace. In this way, they can maintain the peaceful exterior so cherished in these political times. This ideal of fighting rationally comes to us from organized warfare, where the art of strategy was invented and refined. In the beginning, war was not at all strategic. Battles between tribes were fought in a brutal manner, a kind of ritual of violence in which individuals could display their heroism. But as tribes expanded and evolved into states, it became all too apparent that war had too many hidden costs, that waging it blindly often led to exhaustion and self-destruction, even for the victor. Somehow, wars had to be fought more rationally. The word strategy comes from the ancient Greek word strategos, meaning literally the leader of the army. Strategy in this sense was the art of generalship, of commanding the entire war effort, deciding what formations to deploy, what terrain to fight on, what maneuvers to use to gain an edge. And as this knowledge progressed, military leaders discovered that the more they thought and planned ahead, the more possibilities they had for success. Novel strategies could allow them to defeat much larger armies, as Alexander the Great did in his victories over the Persians. In facing savvy opponents who were also using strategy, there developed an upward pressure. To gain an advantage, a general had to be even more strategic, more indirect and clever than the other side. Over time, the arts of generalship became steadily more sophisticated as more strategies were invented. Although the word strategy itself is Greek in origin, the concept appears in all cultures, in all periods. Solid principles on how to deal with the inevitable accidents of war, how to craft the ultimate plan, how to best organize the army, all of this can be found in war manuals from ancient China to modern Europe. As a whole, these principles and strategies indicate a kind of universal military wisdom, a set of adaptable patterns that can increase the chances for victory. Perhaps the greatest strategist of them all was Sun Tzu, author of the ancient Chinese classic, The Art of War. In his book, written probably in the 4th century BC, can be found traces of almost all the strategic patterns and principles later developed over the course of centuries. But what connects them? In fact, what constitutes the art of war itself, in Sun Tzu's eyes, is the ideal of winning without bloodshed. By playing on the psychological weaknesses of the opponent, by maneuvering him into precarious positions, by inducing feelings of frustration and confusion, a strategist can get the other side to break down mentally before surrendering physically. In this way, victory can be had at a much lower cost. And the state that wins wars with few lives lost and resources squandered is the state that can thrive over greater periods of time. Certainly, most wars are not waged so rationally, but those campaigns in history stand out above the rest and serve as the ideal. War is not some separate realm divorced from the rest of society. It is an eminently human arena, full of the best and the worst of our nature. War also reflects trends in society, the evolution toward more unconventional, dirtier strategies, guerrilla warfare, terrorism. Mirrors a similar evolution in society where almost anything goes. The strategies that succeed in war, whether conventional or unconventional, are based on timeless psychology. The strategic ideal in war being supremely rational and emotionally balanced, striving to win with minimum bloodshed and loss of resources, has infinite application and relevance to our daily battles. Inculcated with the values of our times, many will argue that organized war is inherently barbaric, a relic of man's violent past and something to be overcome for good. To promote the arts of warfare in a social setting, they will say, is to stand in the way of progress and to encourage conflict and dissension. Isn't there enough of that in the world? This argument is very seductive, but not at all reasonable. There will always be those in society and in the world at large who are more aggressive than we are, who find ways to get what they want by hook or by crook. We must be vigilant and must know how to defend ourselves against such types. Civilized values are not furthered if we are forced to surrender to those who are crafty and strong. In fact, being pacifists in the face of such wolves is the source of endless tragedy. Others will argue that war and strategy are primarily matters that concern men, particularly those who are aggressive or among the power elite. The study of war and strategy, they will say, is a masculine, elitist, and repressive pursuit, a way for power to perpetuate itself. Such an argument is dangerous nonsense. In the beginning, strategy indeed belonged to a select few, a general, his staff, the king, a handful of courtiers. Soldiers were not taught strategy, for that would not have helped them on the battlefield. Besides, It was unwise to arm one's soldiers with the kind of practical knowledge that could help them to organize a mutiny or rebellion. To maintain strategy and the arts of war as a branch of specialized knowledge is actually to play into the hands of the elites and repressive powers who like to divide and conquer. If strategy is the art of getting results, of putting ideas into practice, then it should be spread far and wide, particularly among those who have been traditionally kept ignorant of it, including women. Instead of resisting the pull of strategy and the virtues of rational warfare, or imagining that it is beneath you, it is far better to confront its necessity. Mastering the art will only make your life more peaceful and productive in the long run, for you will know how to play the game and win without violence. Ignoring it will lead to a life of endless confusion and defeat. The following are 6 fundamental ideals you should aim for in transforming yourself into a strategic warrior in daily life. Look at things as they are, not as your emotions color them. In strategy, you must see your emotional responses to events as a kind of disease that must be remedied. Fear will make you overestimate the enemy and act too defensively. Anger and impatience will draw you into rash actions that will cut off your options. Overconfidence, particularly as a result of success, will make you go too far. Love and affection will blind you to the treacherous maneuvers of those apparently on your side. Even the subtlest gradations of these emotions can color the way you look at events. The only remedy is to be aware that the pull of emotion is inevitable, to notice it when it is happening and to compensate for it. When you have success, be extra wary. When you are angry, take no action. When you are fearful, know you are going to exaggerate the dangers you face. War demands the utmost in realism, seeing things as they are. The more you can limit or compensate for your emotional responses, the closer you will come to this ideal. Judge people by their actions. The brilliance of warfare is that no amount of eloquence or talk can explain away a failure on the battlefield. A general has led his troops to defeat, lives have been wasted, and that is how history will judge him. You must strive to apply this ruthless standard in your daily life, judging people by the results of their actions, the deeds that can be seen and measured, the maneuvers they have used to gain power. What people say about themselves does not matter. People will say anything. Look at what they have done. Deeds do not lie. You must also apply this logic to yourself. In looking back at a defeat, you must identify the things you could have done differently. It is your own bad strategies, not the unfair opponent, that are to blame for your failures. You are responsible for the good and bad in your life. As a corollary to this, look at everything other people do as a strategic maneuver, an attempt to gain victory. People who accuse you of being unfair, for example, who try to make you feel guilty, who talk about justice and morality, are trying to gain an advantage on the chessboard. Depend on your own arms. Everything in life can be taken away from you, and generally will be at some point. Your wealth vanishes. The latest gadgetry suddenly becomes passé. Your allies desert you. But if your mind is armed with the art of war, there is no power that can take that away. In the middle of a crisis, your mind will find its way to the right solution. Having superior strategies at your fingertips will give your maneuvers irresistible force. As Sun Tzu says, being unconquerable lies with yourself. Worship Athena, not Ares. In the mythology of ancient Greece, the cleverest immortal of them all was the goddess Metis. To prevent her from outwitting and destroying him, Zeus married her, then swallowed her whole, hoping to incorporate her wisdom in the process. But Metis was pregnant with Zeus's child, the goddess Athena, who was subsequently born from his forehead. As befitting her lineage, she was blessed with the craftiness of Metis and the warrior mentality of Zeus. She was deemed by the Greeks to be the goddess of strategic warfare, her favorite mortal and acolyte being the crafty Odysseus. Ares was the god of war in its direct and brutal form. The Greeks despised Ares and worshipped Athena, who always fought with the utmost intelligence and subtlety. Your interest in war is not the violence, the brutality, the waste of lives and resources, but the rationality and pragmatism it forces on us, and the ideal of winning without bloodshed. The Ares figures of the world are actually quite stupid and easily misled. Using the wisdom of Athena, your goal is to turn the violence and aggression of such types against them, making their brutality the cause of their downfall. Like Athena, you are always one step ahead, making your moves more indirect. Your goal is to blend philosophy and war, wisdom and battle into an unbeatable blend. Elevate yourself above the battlefield. In war, strategy is the art of commanding the entire military operation. Tactics, on the other hand, is the skill of forming up the army for battle itself and dealing with the immediate needs of the battlefield. Most of us in life are tacticians, not strategists. We become so enmeshed in the conflicts we face that we can think only of how to get what we want in the battle we are currently facing. To think strategically is difficult and unnatural. You may imagine you are being strategic, but in all likelihood, you are merely being tactical. To have the power that only strategy can bring, you must be able to elevate yourself above the battlefield, to focus on your long-term objectives, to craft an entire campaign, to get out of the reactive mode that so many battles in life lock you into. Keeping your overall goals in mind, it becomes much easier to decide when to fight and when to walk away. That makes the tactical decisions of daily life much simpler and more rational. Tactical people are heavy and stuck in the ground. Strategists are light on their feet and can see far and wide. Spiritualize your warfare. Every day you face battles. That is the reality for all creatures in their struggle to survive. But the greatest battle of all is with yourself. Your weaknesses, your emotions, your lack of resolution in seeing things through to the end. You must declare unceasing war on yourself. As a warrior in life, you welcome combat and conflict as ways to prove yourself, to better your skills, to gain courage, confidence, and experience. Instead of repressing your doubts and fears, you must face them down, do battle with them. You want more challenges, and you invite more war. You are forging the warrior's spirit, and only constant practice will lead you there. The 33 Strategies of War is a distillation of a timeless wisdom contained in the lessons and principles of warfare. The program is designed to arm you with practical knowledge that will give you endless options and advantages in dealing with the elusive warriors that attack you in daily battle. Each section of this program is a strategy aimed at solving a particular problem that you will often encounter. The strategies themselves are culled from the writings and practices of the greatest generals in history, as well as the greatest strategists. They range from the basic strategies of classical warfare to the dirty, unconventional strategies of modern times. The program is divided into 5 parts. Self-directed war, how to prepare your mind and spirit for battle. Organizational war, how to structure and motivate your army. Defensive war, offensive war, and unconventional, dirty war. Each section is illustrated with historical examples, not only from warfare itself, but from politics, culture, sports, business, showing the intimate connection between the military and the social. These strategies can be applied to struggles of every scale, organized warfare, business battles, the politics of a group, even personal relationships. Finally, strategy is an art that requires not only a different way of thinking, but an entirely different approach to life itself. Too often there is a chasm between our ideas and knowledge on the one hand, and our actual experience on the other. We absorb trivia and information that takes up mental space but gets us nowhere. We read books that divert us but have little relevance to our daily lives. We have lofty ideas that we do not put into practice. We also have many rich experiences that we do not analyze enough, that do not inspire us with ideas whose lessons we ignore. Strategy requires a constant contact between the two realms. It is practical knowledge of the highest form. Events in life mean nothing if you do not reflect on them in a deep way. And ideas from books are pointless if they have no application to life as you live it. In strategy, all of life is a game that you are playing. This game is exciting, but also requires deep and serious attention. The stakes are so high. What you know must translate into action, and action must translate into knowledge. In this way, strategy becomes a lifelong challenge and the source of constant pleasure in surmounting difficulties and solving problems. Part 1. Self-directed warfare. War, or any kind of conflict, is waged and won through strategy. Think of strategy as a series of lines and arrows aimed at a goal, at getting you to a certain point in the world, at helping you to attack a problem in your path, at figuring out how to encircle and destroy your enemy. Before directing these arrows at your enemies, however, you must first direct them at yourself. Your mind is the starting point of all war and all strategy. A mind that is easily overwhelmed by emotions, that is rooted in the past instead of the present, that cannot see the world with clarity and urgency, will create strategies that will always miss the mark. To become a true strategist, you must take 3 steps. First, become aware of the weakness and illness that can take hold of the mind, warping its strategic powers. Second, declare a kind of war on yourself to make yourself move forward. Third, wage ruthless and continual battle on the enemies within you by applying certain strategies. The following 4 sections are designed to make you aware of the disorders that are probably flourishing in your mind right now, and to arm you with specific strategies for eliminating them. These sections are arrows to aim at yourself. Once you have absorbed them through thought and practice, they will serve as a self-corrective device in all of your future battles, freeing the grand strategist within you. 1. Declare war on your enemies. The polarity strategy. Life is endless battle and conflict, and you cannot fight effectively unless you can identify your enemies. People are subtle and evasive, disguising their intentions, pretending to be on your side. You need clarity. Learn to smoke out your enemies, to spot them by the signs and patterns that reveal hostility. Then, once you have them in your sights, inwardly declare war. As the opposite poles of a magnet create motion, your enemies, your opposites, can fill you with purpose and direction. As people who stand in your way, who represent what you loathe, people to react against, they are a source of energy. Do not be naive. With some enemies, there can be no compromise, no middle ground. The inner enemy. In the spring of 401 BC, Xenophon, a 30-year-old country gentleman who lived outside Athens, received an intriguing invitation. A friend was recruiting Greek soldiers to fight as mercenaries for Cyrus, brother of the Persian king Artaxerxes, and asked him to go along. The request was somewhat unusual. The Greeks and the Persians had long been bitter enemies. Some 80 years earlier, in fact, Persia had tried to conquer Greece. But the Greeks, renowned fighters, had begun to offer their services to the highest bidder, and within the Persian Empire, there were rebellious cities that Cyrus wanted to punish. Greek mercenaries would be the perfect reinforcement in his large army. Xenophon was not a soldier. In fact, he had led a coddled life. He wanted adventure, though, and here he had a chance to meet the great Cyrus, learn war, see Persia. Perhaps, when it was all over, he would write a book. He would go not as a mercenary, he was too wealthy for that, but as a philosopher and a story. After consulting the oracle at Delphi, he accepted the invitation. Some 10,000 Greek soldiers joined Cyrus's punitive expedition. The mercenaries were a motley crew from all over Greece, there for the money and the adventure. They had a good time of it for a while, but a few months into the job, after leading them deep into Persia, Cyrus admitted his true purpose. He was marching on Babylon, mounting a civil war to unseat his brother and make himself king. Unhappy to be deceived, the Greeks argued and complained, but Cyrus offered them more money, and that quieted. The armies of Cyrus and Artaxerxes met on the plains of Canaxa, not far from Babylon. Early in the battle, Cyrus was killed, putting a quick end to the war. Now the Greeks' position was suddenly precarious. Having fought on the wrong side of a civil war, they were far from home and surrounded by hostile Persians. They were soon told, however, that Artaxerxes had no quarrel with them. His only desire was that they leave Persia as quickly as possible. He even sent them an envoy, the Persian commander Tissaphernes, to provision them and escort them back to Greece. And so, guided by Tissaphernes and the Persian army, the mercenaries began the long trek home, some 1,500 miles. A few days into the march, the Greeks had new fears. Their supplies from the Persians were insufficient, and the route that Tissaphernes had chosen for them was problematic. Could they trust these Persians? They started to argue among themselves. The Greek commander Clearchus expressed his soldiers' concerns to Tissaphernes, who was sympathetic. Clearchus should bring his captains to a meeting at a neutral site. The Greeks would voice their grievances, and the two sides would come to an understanding. Clearchus agreed and appeared the next day with his officers at the appointed time and place, where, however, a large contingent of Persians surrounded and arrested them. They were beheaded that same day. One man managed to escape and warn the Greeks of the Persian treachery. That evening, the Greek camp was a desolate place. Some men considered flight, but with their leaders dead, they felt doomed. That night, Xenophon, who had stayed mostly on the sidelines during the expedition, had a dream. A lightning bolt from Zeus set fire to his father's house. He woke up in a sweat. It suddenly struck him. Death was staring the Greeks in the face, yet they lay around moaning, despairing, arguing. The problem was in their heads. Fighting for money rather than for a purpose or cause, unable to distinguish between friend and foe, they had gotten lost. The barrier between them and home was not rivers or mountains or the Persian army, but their own muddled state of mind. Xenophon didn't want to die in this disgraceful way. He believed that if the Greeks concentrated on the enemies who wanted to kill them, they would become alert and creative. If they focused on the vile treachery of the Persians, they would grow angry, and their anger would motivate them. They had to stop being confused mercenaries and go back to being Greeks, the polar opposite of the faithless Persians. What they needed was clarity and direction. Xenophon decided to be Zeus's lightning bolt, waking the men up and illuminating their way. He called a meeting of all the surviving officers and stated his plan. We will declare war without parley on the Persians. No more thoughts of bargaining or debate. We will waste no more time on argument or accusation among ourselves. Every ounce of our energy will be spent on the Persians. We will be as inventive and inspired as our ancestors at Marathon, who fought off a vastly larger Persian army. We will burn our wagons, live off the land, move fast. We will not for 1 second lay down our arms or forget the dangers around us. It is us or them, life or death, good or evil. Should any man try to confuse us with clever talk or with vague ideas of appeasement, we will declare him too stupid and cowardly to be on our side, and we will drive him away. Let the Persians make us merciless. They must be consumed with one idea: getting home alive. The officers knew that Xenophon was right. The next day, a Persian officer came to see him, offering to act as an ambassador between them and Artaxerxes. Following Xenophon's counsel, he was quickly and rudely driven away. It was now war and nothing else. Roused to action, the Greeks elected leaders, Xenophon among them, and began the march home. Forced to depend on their wits, they quickly learned to adapt to the terrain, to avoid battle, to move at night. They successfully eluded the Persians. It took several years, but almost all of them returned to Greece alive. Interpretation. Life is battle and struggle. You will constantly find yourself facing bad situations, destructive relationships, dangerous engagements. How you confront these difficulties will determine your fate. As Xenophon said, your obstacles are not rivers or mountains or other people. Your obstacle is yourself. If you feel lost and confused, if you lose your sense of direction, if you cannot tell the difference between friend and foe, you have only yourself to blame. Think of yourself as always about to go into battle. Everything depends on your frame of mind and on how you look at the world. A shift of perspective can transform you from a passive and confused mercenary into a motivated and creative fighter. Focus on an enemy. It can be someone who blocks your path or sabotages you, whether subtly or obviously. It can be someone who has hurt you or someone who has fought you unfairly. It can be a value or an idea that you loathe and that you see in an individual or group. It can be an abstraction, stupidity, smugness, vulgar materialism. Do not listen to people who say that the distinction between friend and enemy is primitive and passé. They are just disguising their fear of conflict behind a front of false warmth. They are trying to push you off course, to infect you with the vagueness that inflicts them. Once you feel clear and motivated, you will have space for true friendship and true compromise. Your enemy is the polar star that guides you. Given that direction, you can enter battle. Keys to warfare. We live in an era in which people are seldom directly hostile. The rules of engagement, social, political, military, have changed, and so must your notion of the enemy. An upfront enemy is rare now, and is actually a blessing. People hardly ever attack you openly anymore, showing their intentions, their desire to destroy you. Instead, they are political and indirect. Although the world is more competitive than ever, outward aggression is discouraged, so people have learned to go underground, to attack unpredictably, craftily. Many use friendship as a way to mask aggressive desires. They come close to you to do more harm. A friend knows best how to hurt you. Or, without actually being friends, they offer assistance and alliance. They may seem supportive, but in the end, they're advancing their own interests at your expense. Then there are those who master moral warfare, playing the victim, making you feel guilty for something unspecified you've done. The battlefield is full of these warriors, slippery, evasive, and clever. Understand. The word enemy, from the Latin inimicus, not a friend, has been demonized and politicized. Your first task as a strategist is to widen your concept of the enemy, to include in that group those who are working against you, thwarting you, even in subtle ways. Sometimes indifference and neglect are better weapons than aggression, because you can't see the hostility they hide. Without getting paranoid, you need to realize that there are people who wish you ill and operate indirectly. Identify them, and you'll suddenly have room to maneuver. You can stand back and wait and see, or you can take action, whether aggressive or just evasive, to avoid the worst. You can even work to turn this enemy into a friend. But whatever you do not be the naive victim. Do not find yourself constantly retreating, reacting to your enemy's maneuvers. Arm yourself with prudence and never completely lay down your arms, not even for friends. You can sit back and read the signs, or you can actively work to uncover your enemy. Beat the brass to startle the snakes, as the Chinese say. Often the best way to get people to reveal themselves is to provoke tension and argument. The Hollywood producer Harry Cohn, president of Universal Pictures, frequently used this strategy to ferret out the real positions of people in the studio who refused to show what side they were on. He would suddenly attack their work, or take an extreme position, even an offensive one, in an argument. His provoked directors and writers would drop their usual caution and show their real beliefs. Understand, people tend to be vague and slippery because it is safer than outwardly committing to something. If you are the boss, they will mimic your ideas. Their agreement is often pure courtiership. Get them emotional. People are usually more sincere when they argue. If you pick an argument with someone and he keeps on mimicking your ideas, you may be dealing with a chameleon, a particularly dangerous type. Beware of people who hide behind a facade of vague abstractions and impartiality. No one is impartial. A sharply worded question, an opinion designed to offend, will make them react and take sides. Sometimes it is better to take a less direct approach with your potential enemies, to be as subtle and conniving as they are. In 1519, Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico with his band of adventurers. Among these 500 men were some whose loyalty was dubious. Throughout the expedition, whenever any of Cortés's soldiers did something he thought suspicious, he never got angry or accusatory. Instead, he pretended to go along with them, accepting and approving what they had done. Thinking Cortés weak, or thinking he was on their side, they would take another step. Now he had what he wanted, a clear sign to himself and others that they were traitors. Now he could isolate and destroy them. Adopt the method of Cortés. If friends or followers whom you suspect of ulterior motives suggest something subtly hostile or against your interests, or simply odd, avoid the temptation to react, to say no, to get angry, or even to ask questions. Go along, or seem to turn a blind eye. Your enemies will soon go further, showing more of their hands. Now you have to decide and you can attack. An enemy is often large and hard to pinpoint. An organization or a person hidden behind some complicated network. What you want to do is take aim at one part of the group, a leader, a spokesman, a key member of the inner circle. Personalize the fight, eyeball to eyeball. Enemies bring many gifts. For one thing, they motivate you and focus your beliefs. The artist Salvador Dali found early on that there were many qualities he could not stand in people. Conformity, romanticism, piety. At every stage of his life, he found someone he thought embodied these anti-ideals, an enemy to vent on. First, it was the poet Federico Garcia Lorca, who wrote romantic poetry. Then, it was André Breton, the heavy-handed leader of the Surrealist movement. Having such enemies to rebel against made Dali feel confident and inspired. Enemies also give you a standard by which to judge yourself, both personally and socially. A tough opponent will bring out the best in you, and the bigger the opponent, the greater your reward, even in defeat. It is better to lose to a worthy opponent than to squash some harmless foe. You will gain sympathy and respect, building support for your next fight. Being attacked is a sign that you are important enough to be a target. You should relish the attention and the chance to prove yourself. We all have aggressive impulses that we are forced to repress. An enemy supplies you with an outlet for these drives. At last, you have someone on whom to unleash your aggression without feeling guilty. Leaders have always found it useful to have an enemy at their gates in times of trouble, distracting the public from their difficulties. In using your enemies to rally your troops, polarize them as far as possible, they will fight the more fiercely when they feel a little hatred. To exaggerate the differences between you and the enemy, draw the lines clearly. Xenophon made no effort to be fair. He did not say that the Persians weren't really such a bad lot and had done much to advance civilization. He called them barbarians, the antithesis of the Greeks. He described their recent treachery and said they were an evil culture that could find no favor with the gods. And so it is with you. Victory is your goal, not victory in battles. Use the rhetoric of war to heighten the stakes and stimulate the spirit. Reversal. Always keep the search for and use of enemies under control. It is clarity you want, not control. It is the downfall of many tyrants to see an enemy in everything. They lose their grip on reality and become hopelessly embroiled in the emotions their paranoia turns up. Also, beware of polarizing people so completely that you cannot back off. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a master polarizer, always looking to draw a line between himself and his enemy. Once he made that line clear enough, he backed off, which made him look like a conciliator, a man of peace who occasionally went to war. Even if that impression was false, it was the height of wisdom to create it. 2. Do not fight the last war. The guerrilla war of the mind strategy. What most often weighs you down and brings you misery is the past, in the form of unnecessary attachments, repetitions of tired formulas, and the memory of old victories and defeats. You must consciously wage war against the past and force yourself to react to the present moment. Be ruthless on yourself. Do not repeat the same tired methods. Sometimes you must force yourself to strike out in new directions, even if they involve the risk. What you may lose in comfort and security, you will gain in surprise, making it harder for your enemies to tell what you will do. Wage guerrilla war on your mind, allowing no static lines of defense, no exposed citadels. Make everything fluid and mobile. The last war. No one has risen to power faster than Napoleon Bonaparte. 1769-1821. In 1793, he went from captain in the French Revolutionary Army to brigadier general. In 1796, he became the leader of the French forces in Italy, fighting the Austrians, whom he crushed that year and again 3 years later. He became first consul of France in 1801, emperor in 1804. In 1805, he humiliated the Austrian and Russian armies at the Battle of Austerlitz. For many, Napoleon was more than a great general. He was a genius, a god of war. Not everyone was impressed. There were Prussian generals who thought he had merely been lucky. If he ever faced the Prussians, he would be revealed as a great fate. Among these Prussian generals was Friedrich Ludwig, Prince of Hohenlohe-Ingelfingen. Hohenlohe came from one of Germany's oldest aristocratic families, one with an illustrious military record. To Hohenlohe, success in war depended on organization, discipline, and the use of superior strategies developed by trained military minds. The Prussians exemplified all of these virtues. Prussian soldiers drilled relentlessly until they could perform elaborate maneuvers as precisely as a machine. Prussian generals intensely studied the victories of Frederick the Great. War for them was a mathematical affair, the application of timeless principles. To the generals, Napoleon was a Corsican pothead, leading an unruly citizen's army. Superior in knowledge and skill, they would out-strategize him. The Napoleonic myth would lie in ruins, and Europe could return to its old ways. In August 1806, Hohenlohe and his fellow generals finally got what they wanted. King Friedrich Wilhelm III of Prussia, tired of Napoleon's broken promises, decided to declare war on him in 6 weeks. In the meantime, he asked his generals to come up with a plan to crush the French. Hohenlohe was ecstatic. The campaign would be the climax of his career. He had been thinking for years about war, and he presented his plan to the generals' first strategy session. Precise marches would place the army at the perfect angle from which to attack the French as they advanced through southern Prussia. An attack in oblique formation, Frederick the Great's favorite tactic, would deliver a devastating blow. The other generals, all in their 60s and 70s, presented their own plans, but these too were merely variants on the tactics of Frederick the Great. Discussion turned into argument. Several weeks went by. Finally, the king had to step in and create a compromise strategy that would satisfy all of his generals. A feeling of exuberance swept the country, which would soon relive the glory years of Frederick the Great. On October 5th, a few days before the king was to declare war, disturbing news reached the generals. A reconnaissance mission revealed that divisions of Napoleon's army, which they had believed was dispersed, had marched east, merged, and was massing deep in southern Prussia. The captain who had led the scouting mission reported that the French soldiers were marching with packs on their backs. Where the Prussians used slow-moving wagons to provision their troops, the French carried their own supply and moved with astonishing speed and mobility. Before the generals had time to adjust their plans, Napoleon's army suddenly wheeled north, heading straight for Berlin, the heart of Prussia. The generals argued and dithered, moving their troops here and there, trying to decide where to attack. A mode of panic set in. Finally, the king ordered a retreat. The troops would reassemble to the north and attack Napoleon's flank as he advanced toward Berlin. Hohenlohe was in charge of the rear guard, protecting the Prussians' retreat. On October 14th, near the town of Jena, Napoleon caught up with Hohenlohe, who finally faced the battle he had wanted so desperately. The numbers on both sides were equal, but while the French were an unruly force, fighting pell-mell and on the run, Hohenlohe kept his troops in tight order, orchestrating them like a corps de ballet. The fighting went back and forth until finally the French captured the village of Vierzehnheiligen. Hohenlohe ordered his troops to retake the village. In a ritual dating back to Frederick the Great, a drum major beat out a cadence, and the Prussian soldiers, their colors flying, reformed their positions in perfect parade order, preparing to advance. They were in an open plain, though, and Napoleon's men were behind garden walls and on the house roofs. The Prussians fell like ninepins to the French marksmen. Confused, Hohenlohe ordered his soldiers to halt and change formation. The drums beat again. The Prussians marched with magnificent precision, always a sight to behold, but the French kept shooting, decimating the Prussian line. Never had Hohenlohe seen such an army. The French soldiers were like demons. Unlike his disciplined soldiers, they moved on their own, yet there was method to their madness. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, they rushed forward on both sides, threatening to surround the Prussians. The prince ordered a retreat. The Battle of Jena was over. Like a house of cards, the Prussians quickly crumbled, one fortress falling after another. The king fled east. In a matter of days, virtually nothing remained of the once mighty Prussian army. Interpretation. The reality facing the Prussians in 1806 was simple. They had fallen 50 years behind the times. Their generals were old, and instead of responding to present circumstances, they were repeating formulas that had worked in the past. You might find the Prussian army just an interesting historical example, but in fact, you are likely marching in the same direction yourself. What limits individuals as well as nations is the inability to confront reality, to see things for what they are. As we grow older, we become more rooted in the past. Habit takes over. Something that has worked for us before becomes a doctrine, a shell to protect us from reality. Repetition replaces creativity. We rarely realize we're doing this, because it is almost impossible for us to see it happening in our own minds. Then, suddenly, a young Napoleon crosses our path, a person who does not respect tradition, who fights in a new way. Only then do we see that our ways of thinking and responding have fallen behind the times. Never take it for granted that your past successes will continue into the future. Actually, your past successes are your biggest obstacle. Every battle, every war is different, and you cannot assume that what worked before will work today. You must cut yourself loose from the past and open your eyes to the present. Your tendency to fight the last war may lead to your final war. Keys to warfare. In looking back on an unpleasant or disagreeable experience, the thought inevitably occurs to us, if only we had said or done X instead of Y. If only we could do it over. Even Prince Hohenlohe, years later, could see how he had botched the retaking of Witz and Heiligen. The problem, though, is not that we think of the solution only when it is too late. The problem is that we imagine that knowledge is what was lacking. If only we had known more. If only we had thought it through more thoroughly. That is precisely the wrong approach. What makes us go astray in the first place is that we are unattuned to the present moment, insensitive to the circumstances. We are listening to our own thoughts, reacting to things that happened in the past, applying theories and ideas that were digested long ago, but that have nothing to do with our predicament in the present. More books, theories, and thinking only make the problem worse. Understand. The greatest generals, the most creative strategists, stand out not because they have more knowledge, but because they are able, when necessary, to drop their preconceived notions and focus intensely on the present moment. That is how creativity is sparked and opportunities are seized. Knowledge, experience, and theory have limitations. No amount of thinking in advance can prepare you for the chaos of life, for the infinite possibilities of the moment. The great philosopher of war, Karl von Clausewitz, called this friction, the difference between our plans and what actually happens. Since friction is inevitable, our minds have to be capable of keeping up with the change and adapting to the unexpected. The better we can adapt our thoughts to changing circumstances, the more realistic our responses to them will be. The more we lose ourselves in pre-digested theories and past experiences, the more inappropriate and delusional our response. It can be valuable to analyze what went wrong in the past, but it is far more important to develop the capacity to think in the moment. In that way, you will make far fewer mistakes to analyze. Think of the mind as a river. The faster it flows, the better it keeps up with the present in response to change. The faster it flows, also, the more it refreshes itself and the greater its energy. Obsessional thoughts, past experiences, whether traumas or successes, and preconceived notions are like boulders or mud in this river, settling and hardening there and damming it up. The river stops moving, stagnation sets in. You must wage a constant war on this tendency in the mind. The first step is simply to be aware of the process and of the need to fight it. The second is to adopt a few tactics that might help you to restore the mind's natural flow. Re-examine all of your cherished beliefs and principles. When Napoleon was asked what principles of war he followed, he replied that he followed none. His genius was his ability to respond to circumstances, to make the most of what he was given. He was the supreme opportunist. Your only principle, similarly, should be to have no principles. To believe that strategy has inexorable laws or timeless rules is to take up a rigid, static position, that will be your undoing. Be brutal with the past, with tradition, with the old ways of doing things. Declare war on sacred cows and voices of convention in your own head. Erase the memory of the last war. The last war you fought is a danger, even if you win. If you are victorious, you will tend to repeat the strategies you just used, for success makes us lazy and complacent. If you lost, you may be skittish and indecisive. Do not think about the last war. Instead, do whatever you can to blot it from your mind. Ted Williams, perhaps baseball's greatest pure hitter, made a point of always trying to forget his last at-bat. Whether he got in a home run or a strikeout, he put it behind him. No two at-bats are the same, even against the same pitcher, and Williams wanted an open mind. He would not wait for the next at-bat to start forgetting. The minute he got back to himself, he started focusing on what was happening in the game taking place. Attention to the details of the present is by far the best way to crowd out the past and forget the last war. Keep the mind moving. When we were children, our minds never stopped. We were open to new experiences and absorbed as much of them as possible. We learned fast because the world around us excited us. When we felt frustrated or upset, we would find some creative way to get what we wanted, and then quickly forget the problem as something new crossed our path. All the greatest strategists, Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Musashi, were childlike in this respect. Sometimes, in fact, they even acted like children. The reason is simple. Superior strategists see things as they are. They are highly sensitive to dangers and opportunities. Nothing stays the same in life, and keeping up with circumstances as they change requires a great deal of mental fluidity. Great strategists do not act according to preconceived ideas. They respond to the moment, like children. Their minds are always moving, and they are always excited and curious. They quickly forget the past. The present is much more interesting. Absorb the spirit of the times. Throughout the history of warfare, there have been classic battles in which the past has confronted the future in a hopeless mismatch. In each case, the conquering army developed a way of fighting that maximized a new form of technology or a new social order. You can reproduce this effect on a smaller scale by attuning yourself to the spirit of the time. Developing antennae for the trends that have yet to crest takes work and study, as well as the flexibility to adapt to those times. As you get older, it is best to periodically alter your style. By constantly adapting and changing your style, you will avoid the pitfalls of your previous rules. Just when people feel they know you, you will change. Reverse course. Relationships often develop a certain tiresome predictability. You do what you usually do. Other people respond the way they usually do, and around it goes. If you reverse course, act in a novel manner, you alter the entire dynamic. Do this every so often to break up the relationship's stale patterns and open it to new possibilities. Think of your mind as an army. Armies must adapt to the complexity and chaos of modern war by becoming more fluid and maneuverous. The ultimate extension of this evolution is guerrilla warfare, which exploits chaos by making disorder and unpredictability a strategy. The guerrilla army never stops to defend a particular place or town. It wins by always moving, staying one step ahead. By following no set pattern, it gives the enemy no target. The guerrilla army never repeats the same tactic. It responds to the situation, the moment, the terrain where it happens to find itself. There is no front, no concrete line of communication or supply, no slow-moving wagon. The guerrilla army is pure mobility. That is the model for your new way of thinking. Apply no tactic rigidly. Do not let your mind settle into static positions, defending any particular place or idea, repeating the same lifeless maneuvers. Attack problems from new angles, adapting to the landscape and to what you're given. By staying in constant motion, you show your enemies no target but danger. You exploit the chaos of the world instead of succumbing. Reversal. There is never any value in fighting the last war. But while you're eliminating that pernicious tendency, you must imagine that your enemy is trying to do the same, trying to learn from and adapt to the present. Err on the side of caution. Be ready. Never let your enemy surprise you in war. Three. Amidst the turmoil of events, do not lose your presence of mind. The counterbalance strategy. In the heat of battle, the mind tends to lose its balance. Too many things confront you at the same time. Unexpected setbacks, doubts, and criticisms from your own allies. There's a danger of responding emotionally with fear, depression, or frustration. It is vital to keep your presence of mind, maintaining your mental powers, whatever the circumstances. You must actively resist the emotional pull of the moment, staying decisive, confident, and aggressive no matter what hits you. Make the mind tougher by exposing it to adversity. Learn to detach yourself from the chaos of the battlefield. Let others lose their heads. Your presence of mind will steer you clear of their influence and keep you on course. The hyper-aggressive tactic. Vice Admiral Lord Horatio Nelson, 1758-1805, had been through it all. He had lost his right eye in the siege of Calvi and his right arm in the Battle of Tenerife. He had defeated the Spanish at Cape St. Vincent in 1797 and had thwarted Napoleon's Egyptian campaign by defeating his navy at the Battle of the Nile the following year. But none of his tribulations and triumphs prepared him for the problems he faced from his own colleagues in the British Navy as they prepared to go to war against Denmark in February 1801. Nelson, England's most glorious war hero, was the obvious choice to lead the fleet. Instead, the Admiralty chose Sir Hyde Parker, with Nelson his second in command. This war was a delicate business. It was intended to force the disobedient Danes to comply with a British-led embargo on the shipping of military goods to France. The fiery Nelson was prone to lose his cool. He hated Napoleon, and if he went too far against the Danes, he would produce a diplomatic fiasco. Sir Hyde was an older, more stable, even-tempered man who would do the job and nothing more. Nelson swallowed his pride and took the assignment, but he saw trouble. He knew the time was near. The faster the Navy sailed, the less chance the Danes would have to build up the defense. The ships were ready to sail, but Parker's motto was, everything in good order. It wasn't his style, thoroughly. Nelson burned for action. He reviewed intelligence reports, studied maps, and came up with a detailed plan for fighting the Danes. He wrote to Parker urging him to seize the initiative. Parker ignored him. At last, on March 11th, the British fleet set sail. Instead of heading for Copenhagen, however, Parker anchored well to the north of the city's harbor and called a meeting of his captains. According to intelligence reports, he explained, the Danes had prepared elaborate defenses for Copenhagen. Boats anchored in the harbor, forts to the north and south, and mobile artillery batteries could blast the British out of the water. How to fight this artillery without terrible losses? Also, pilots who knew the waters around Copenhagen reported that they were treacherous, places of sandbars and tricky winds. Navigating these dangers under bombardment would be harrowing. With all of these difficulties, perhaps it was best to wait for the Danes to leave harbor and then fight them in open sea. Nelson struggled to control himself. Finally, he let loose, pacing the room, the stub of his lost arm jerking as he spoke. No war, he said, had ever been won by waiting. The Danish defenses looked formidable to those who are children at war, but he had worked out a strategy weeks earlier. He would attack from the south, the easier approach, while Parker and a reserve force would stay to the city's north. Nelson would use his mobility to take out the Danish guns. He had studied the maps. Sandbars were no threat. As for the wind, aggressive action was more important than fretting over wind. Nelson's speech energized Parker's captains. He was by far their most successful leader, and his confidence was catching. Even Sir Hyde was impressed, and the plan was approved. The next morning, Nelson's line of ships advanced on Copenhagen, and the battle began. The Danish guns, firing on the British at close range, took a fierce toll. Nelson paced the deck of his flagship, HMS Alpha, urging his men on. He was in an excited, almost ecstatic state. A shot through the mainmast nearly hit him. "It is warm work, and this day may be the last to any of us at any moment," he told the colonel, a little shaken up by the blast. "But mark you, I would not be elsewhere for thousands." Parker followed the battle from his position to the north. He now regretted agreeing to Nelson's plan. He was responsible for the campaign, and a defeat could ruin his career. After 4 hours of back-and-forth bombardment, he had seen enough. The fleet had taken a beating and had gained no advantage. Nelson never knew when to quit. Parker decided it was time to hoist signal flag 39, the order to withdraw. The first ships to see it were to acknowledge it and pass the signal on down the line. Once acknowledged, there was nothing else to do but retreat. The battle was over. On board the elevator, a lieutenant told Nelson about the signal. The vice admiral ignored it. Continuing to pound the Danish defenses, he eventually called to an officer. "Is number 16 still hoisted?" Number 16 was his own flag. It meant engage the enemy more closely. The officer confirmed that the flag was still flying. "Mind you, keep it so," Nelson told him. A few minutes later, Parker's signal still flapping in the breeze, Nelson turned to his flag captain. "You know, Foley, I have only one eye. I have a right to be blind sometimes." And raising his telescope to his blind eye, he calmly remarked, "I really do not see the signal." Torn between obeying Parker and obeying Nelson, the fleet captains chose Nelson. They would risk their careers along with his. But soon the Danish defenses started to crack. Some of the ships anchored in the harbor surrendered, and the firing of the guns began to slow. Less than an hour after Parker's signal to stop the battle, the Danes surrendered. The next day, Parker perfunctorily congratulated Nelson on the victory. He did not mention his subordinate's disobedience. He was hoping the whole affair, including his own lack of courage, would be quietly forgotten. Interpretation. When the Admiralty put its faith in Sir Hyde, it made a classic military error. It entrusted the waging of a war to a man who was careful and methodical. Such men may seem calm, even strong, in times of peace, but their self-control often hides weakness. The reason they think things through so carefully is that they are terrified of making a mistake and of what that might mean for them or their career. This doesn't come out until they are tested in battle. Suddenly, they cannot make a decision. They see problems everywhere and defeat in the smallest setback. They hang back, not out of patience, but out of fear. Often these moments of hesitation spell their doom. Presence of mind is a kind of counterbalance to mental weakness, to our tendency to get emotional and lose perspective in the heat of battle. Our greatest weakness is losing heart, doubting ourselves, becoming unnecessarily cautious. Being more careful is not what we need. That is just a screen for our fear of conflict, of making a mistake. What we need is double resolve, an intensification of confidence. That will serve as a counterbalance. In moments of turmoil and trouble, you must force yourself to be more determined. Call up the aggressive energy you need to overcome caution and inertia. Any mistakes you make, you can rectify with more energetic action still. Save your carefulness for the hours of preparation, but once the fighting begins, Empty your mind of doubts. Ignore those who quail at any setback and call for retreat. Find joy in attacking. Momentum will carry you through. Please for warfare. Our minds seem rather strong when we're following our routine. But place any of us in an adverse situation and our rationality vanishes. We react to pressure by growing fearful, impatient, confused. Such moments reveal us for the emotional creatures we are. Under attack, whether by a known enemy or unpredictably by a colleague, our response is dominated by feelings of anger, sadness, betrayal. Only with great effort can we reason our way through these periods and respond rationally, and our rationality rarely lasts past the next attack. Understand, your mind is weaker than your emotions. But you become aware of this weakness only in moments of adversity, precisely the time when you need strength. What best equips you to cope with the heat of battle is neither more knowledge nor more intellect. What makes your mind stronger and more able to control your emotions is internal discipline and toughness. No one can teach you this skill. You cannot learn it by reading about it. Like any discipline, it can come only through practice, experience, even a little suffering. The first step in building up presence of mind is to see the need for it, to want it badly enough to be willing to work for it. Historical figures who stand out for their presence of mind: Alexander the Great, Ulysses S. Grant, Winston Churchill, acquired it through adversity, through trial and error. They were in positions of responsibility in which they had to develop this quality, or see it. Although these men may have been blessed with an unusual amount of personal fortitude, they had to work hard to strengthen this into presence of mind. The ideas that follow are based on their experience and hard-won victories. Think of these ideas as exercises, ways to toughen your mind, each a kind of counterbalance to emotion's overpowering pull. Expose yourself to conflict. George S. Patton came from one of America's most distinguished military families. But Patton was also a sensitive young man, and he had one deep fear that in battle he would turn coward and disgrace the family name. Patton had his first real taste of battle in 1918 at the age of 32, during the Allied offensive on the Argonne during World War I. He commanded a tank division. At one point during the battle, Patton managed to lead some American infantry to a position on a hilltop overlooking a key strategic town. But German fire forced them to take cover. Soon it became clear that they were trapped. If they retreated, they would come under fire from positions on the sides of the hill. If they advanced, they would run right into a battery of German machines. If they were all to die, as it seemed to Patton, better to die advancing. At the moment he was to lead the troops in the charge, Patton was stricken by intense fear. His body trembled and his legs turned to jelly. In a confirmation of his deepest fears, he had lost his limbs. At that instant, looking into the clouds beyond the German batteries, Patton had a vision. He saw his illustrious military ancestors, all in their uniforms, staring sternly down at him. They seemed to be inviting him to join their company, the company of dead war heroes. Paradoxically, the sight of these men had a calming effect on the young Patton. Calling for volunteers to follow him, he yelled, "It is time for another Patton to die." The strength had returned to his legs. He stood up and charged toward the German guns. Seconds later he fell, hit in the thigh, but he survived the battle. From that moment on, even after he became a general, Patton made a point of visiting the front lines, exposing himself needlessly to danger. He tested himself again and again. His vision of his ancestors remained a constant stimulus, a challenge to his honor. Each time it became easier to face down his fears. It seemed to his fellow generals and to his own men that no one had more presence of mind impact. They did not know how much of this risk was in the. The story of that teaches us two things. First, it is better to confront your fears, let them come to the surface, than to ignore them or chant them down. The sensation of overcoming a deep-rooted fear gives you confidence and presence of mind. The more conflicts and difficult situations you put yourself through, the more battle-tested your mind will be. Second, Patton's experience demonstrates the motivating power of a sense of honest integrity. In giving into fear, in losing your presence of mind, you disgrace not only yourself, your self-image, and your reputation, but your company, your family, your group. You bring down the communal spirit. Being the leader of even the smallest group gives you something to live up to. People are watching you, judging you, depending on you. To lose your composure would make it hard for you to live. Be self-reliant. There is nothing worse than feeling dependent on others. Dependency makes you vulnerable to all kinds of emotions, betrayal, disappointment, frustration, that play havoc with your mental balance. To make yourself less dependent on others and so-called experts, you need to expand your repertoire of skills. And you need to feel more confident in your own judgment. Understand, we tend to overestimate other people's abilities. After all, they're trying hard to make it look as if they knew what they were doing. And we tend to underestimate our own. You must compensate for this by trusting yourself more and others less. It is important to remember, though, that being self-reliant does not mean burdening yourself with petty details. You must be able to distinguish between small matters that are best left to others and larger issues that require your attention and care. Suffer fools gladly. The world is full of fools, people who cannot wait to get results, who change with the wind, who can't see past their noses. You encounter them everywhere. The indecisive boss, the rash colleague, the hysterical subordinate. When working alongside fools, do not fight them. Instead, think of them the way you think of children or pets, not important enough to affect your mental balance. Detach yourself emotionally. And while you're inwardly laughing at their foolishness, indulge them in one of their more harmless ideas. The ability to stay cheerful in the face of fools is an important skill. Crowd out feelings of panic by focusing on simple tasks. When circumstances scare us, our imagination tends to take over, filling our minds with endless anxiety. You need to gain control of your imagination, something easier said than done. Often the best way to calm down and give yourself such control is to force the mind to concentrate on something relatively simple, a calming ritual, a repetitive task that you are good at. You are creating the kind of composure you naturally have in your mind before you. A focused mind has no room for anxiety or for the effects of an overactive imagination. Once you have regained your mental power, you can then face the problem at hand. At the first sign of any kind of fear, practice this technique until it becomes a habit. Being able to control your imagination at intense moments is a crucial skill. Unintimidate yourself. Intimidation will always threaten your presence of mind, and it is a hard feeling to combat. The key to staying unintimidated is to convince yourself that the person you're facing is a mere mortal, no different from you, which is, in fact, the truth. See the person, not the myth. Imagine him or her as a child, as someone riddled with insecurity. Cutting the person down to size will help you keep your mental balance. Develop your Fingerspitzengefühl, fingertip feel. Presence of mind depends not only on your mind's ability to come to your aid in difficult situations, but also on the speed with which this happens. Waiting until the next day to think of the right actions to take does you no good at all. Speed here means responding to circumstances with rapidity and making lightning-quick decisions. This power is often read as a kind of intuition, what the Germans call Fingerspitzengefühl, fingertip feel. Erwin Rommel, who led the German tank campaign in North Africa during World War II, had great fingertip feel. He could sense when the Allies would attack and from what direction. In choosing a line of advance, he had an uncanny feel for his enemy's weakness. At the start of a battle, he could intuit his enemy's strategy before it unfolded. Rommel didn't just study his mechanics, the sword. He got inside their skin, understood the spirit of enemies, what made them tick. Having felt his way into these things in battle, he entered a state of mind in which he did not have to think consciously of the situation. The totality of what was going on in his world at his fingertips. He had Fingerspitzengefühl. Whether or not you have a mind of your own, there are things you can do to help you respond faster and bring out the intuitive feel of all animals. Deep knowledge of the terrain will let you process information faster than your enemy. A tremendous advantage. Getting a feel for the spirit of men and material, thinking your way into them instead of looking at them from outside, will help to put you in a different frame of mind, less conscious and forced, more unconscious and intuitive. Get your mind into the habit of making lightning-quick decisions, trusting your fingertip feel. Your mind will advance in a kind of mental blitzkrieg, moving past your opponents before they realize what it's doing. Finally, do not think of presence of mind as a quality useful only in periods of adversity, something to switch off and on as you need it. Cultivate it as an everyday condition. Confidence, fearlessness, and self-reliance are as crucial in times of peace as in times of war. Reversal. You do not want to lose your presence of mind in key situations, but it is a wise course to find a way to make your enemies lose theirs. Take what throws you off balance and impose it on them. 4. Create a sense of urgency and desperation. The death ground strategy. You are your own worst enemy. You waste precious time dreaming of the future instead of engaging in the present. Since nothing seems urgent to you, you are only half involved in what you do. The only way to change is through action and outside pressure. Put yourself in situations where you have too much at stake to waste time or resources. If you cannot afford to lose, you won't. Cut your ties to the past. Enter unknown territory where you must depend on your wits and energy to see you through. Place yourself on death ground, where your back is against the wall and you have to fight like hell to get out alive. The no-return tactic. In 1504, an ambitious 19-year-old Spaniard named Hernán Cortés gave up his studies in law and sailed for his country's colonies in the North. Stopping first in Santo Domingo, the island today comprising Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Then, in Cuba, he soon heard about a land to the west called Mexico, an empire teeming with gold and dominated by the Aztecs, with their magnificent highland capital of Tenochtitlan. From then on, Cortés had just one thought: someday he would conquer and settle the land. Over the next 10 years, Cortés slowly rose through the ranks, eventually becoming secretary to the Spanish governor of Cuba, and then the king's treasurer of the island. In his own mind, he was merely biding his time. He waited patiently while Spain sent other men to Mexico, many of them never returned. Finally, in 1518, the governor of Cuba, Diego de Velázquez, made Cortés the leader of an expedition to discover what had happened to these earlier explorers: find gold, and lay the groundwork for the country's conquest. Velázquez wanted to make that future conquest himself, however. So for this expedition, he wanted a man in control, and he soon developed doubts about Cortez. The man was clever, perhaps too much so. Word reached Cortez that the governor was having second thoughts about sending him to Mexico. Deciding to give Velázquez no time to nurse his misgivings, he managed to slip out of Cuba in the middle of the night with a little ship. He would explain himself to the governor later. The expedition landed on Mexico's east coast in March 1519. Over the next few months, Cortez put his plans to work, founding the town of Veracruz, forging alliances with local tribes who favored the Aztecs, and making initial contact with the Aztec Emperor, whose capital lay some 250 miles to the west. But one problem plagued the conquistadors. Among the 500 soldiers sailing to Cuba were a handful who had been placed there by Velázquez to act as spies and make trouble for him if he exceeded his powers. These Velázquez loyalists accused Cortez of mismanaging the gold that he was collecting, and when it became clear that he intended to conquer Mexico, they spread rumors that he was insane, an all too convincing accusation to make about a man planning to lead 500 men against 500,000 Spaniards, fierce warriors known to eat their prisoner's flesh and wear the skin as trophies. A rational man would take the gold they had, return to Cuba, and come back later with an army. Why stay in this forbidden land with its diseases and its lack of creature comforts when they were so heavily outnumbered? Why not sail for Cuba, back home where their farms, their wives, and the good life awaited them? Cortez did what he could with his colors, bribing some, keeping a close eye on others. Meanwhile, he worked to build a strong enough rapport with the rest of his men that the grumblers could do no harm. All seemed well until the night of July 5th, when Cortez was awoken by a Spanish sailor who, begging for mercy, confessed that he had joined in a plot to steal a ship and return that very evening to Cuba, where the conspirators would tell Velázquez about Cortez's goal of conquering Mexico on his own. Cortez sensed that this was the decisive moment of the expedition. He could easily squash the conspiracy, but there would be others. His men were a rough lot, and their minds were on gold, Cuba, their families, anything but fighting the Aztecs. He could not conquer an empire with men so divided and untrustworthy, but how to fill them with the energy and focus for the immense task before him. Thinking this through, he decided to take swift action. He seized the conspirators and had the two ringleaders killed. Next, he bribed his pilots to bore holes in all of the ships and then announced that worms had eaten through the boards of the vessels, making them unsealable. Pretending to be upset at the news, Cortez ordered what was salvageable from the ships to be taken ashore and then the holes be sunk. The pilots complied, but not enough holes had been bored, and only 5 of the ships went down. The story of the worms was plausible enough, and the soldiers accepted the news of the 5 ships with grief. But when a few days later, more ships were run aground, and only 1 was left afloat, it was clear to them that Cortez had arranged the whole thing. When he called a meeting, their mood was mutinous and murderous. This was no time for subtlety. Cortez addressed his men. He was responsible for the disaster. He had ordered it done, but now there was no turning back. They could hang him, but they were surrounded by hostile Indians and had no ships. Divided and leaderless, they would perish. The only alternative was to follow him to Tenochtitlan. Only by conquering the Aztecs, by becoming lords of Mexico, could they get back to Cuba alive. To reach Tenochtitlan, they would have to fight with utter intensity. They would have to be unified. Any dissension would lead to defeat and a killer's death. The situation was desperate, but if the men fought desperately in turn, Cortez guaranteed that he would lead them to victory. Since the army was so small in number, the glory and riches would be all the greater. Any cowards not up to the challenge could sail the one remaining ship home. No one accepted the offer, and the last ship was run aground. Over the next month, Cortez kept his army away from Veracruz to the coast. Their attention was focused on Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire. The grumbling, the self-interest, and the greed all disappeared. Understanding the danger of their situation, the conquistadors fought ruthlessly. Some 2 years after the destruction of the Spanish ships, and with the help of their Indian allies, Cortez's army laid siege to Tenochtitlan and conquered the island. Interpretation. For Cortez's soldiers, the ships were a crutch, something to fall back on if things got ugly. Once Cortez had identified the problem, the solution was simple: destroy the ships. By putting his men in a desperate place, he would make them fight with utmost intensity. A sense of urgency comes from a powerful connection to the present. Instead of dreaming of rescue or hoping for a better future, you have to face the issue at hand. Fail, and you perish. People who involve themselves completely in the immediate problem are intimidated because they are focusing so intensely, they seem more powerful than they are. Their sense of urgency multiplies their strength and gives them momentum. Instead of 500 men, Cortez suddenly had the weight of a much larger army at his back. Like Cortez, you must locate the root of your problem. It is not the people around you, it is yourself, and the spirit with which you face the world. In the back of your mind, you keep an escape route, a crutch, something to turn to if things go bad. Maybe it is some wealthy relative you can count on to buy your way out. Maybe it is some grand opportunity on the horizon, the endless vistas of time that seem to be before you. Maybe it is a familiar job or a comfortable relationship that is always there, with just as Cortez's men sold their ships for insurance, you may see this fallback as a blessing, but in fact, it is a curse. It divides you. Because you think you have options, you never involve yourself deeply in one thing to do it well, and you never fight for it. Sometimes you need to run your ships aground, burn them, and leave yourself just one option: succeed or go down. Make the burning of your ships as real as possible. Get rid of your safety net. Sometimes you have to become desperate to go. Keys to warfare. Leaders of armies have thought about this subject since armies existed. How can soldiers be motivated, be made more aggressive, more desperate? Some generals have relied on fiery oratory, and those particularly good have had some success. But over 2,000 years ago, the Chinese strategist Sun Tzu came to believe that listening to speeches, no matter how rousing, was too passive an experience to have an enduring effect. Instead, Sun Tzu talked of a death ground, a place where an army is backed up against some geographical feature, like a mountain, a river, or a forest, and has no escape route. Without a way to retreat, Sun Tzu argued, an army fight would double or triple the spirit it would have on open terrain, because death is viscerally present. Sun Tzu advocated deliberately stationing soldiers on death ground to give them the desperate edge that makes men fight with together. That is what Cortez did in Mexico, and it is the only sure way to create a real fire in belly. The world is ruled by necessity. People change their behavior only if they can. They will feel urgency only if their lives depend on it. Death ground is a psychological phenomenon that goes well beyond the battlefield. It is any set of circumstances in which you feel enclosed and without options. There is very real pressure at your back, and you cannot retreat. Time is running out. Failure, a form of psychic death, is staring you in the face. You must act or suffer the consequences. The trick is to use this effect deliberately from time to time, to practice it on yourself as a kind of wake-up call. The following 5 acts are designed to put you on a psychological death ground. Reading and thinking about them won't work. You must put them into effect. They are forms of pressure to apply to yourself. Depending on whether you want a low-intensity jolt or regular or a real shock, you can turn the level up or down. The state is up to you. Take everything on a single throw. Often we try too many things at one time, thinking that one of them will bring us success. But in these situations, our minds are confused, our efforts aren't right. It is better to take on one daunting challenge, even one that others think foolish. Our future is at stake. We cannot afford to lose. So we don't. Act before we are ready. We often wait too long to act, particularly when we face no outside pressure. It is sometimes better to act before you are ready, to force the issue. Not only will you take your opponent by surprise, you will also have to make the most of your resources. You have committed yourself and cannot turn back. Under pressure, your creativity will flourish. Do this often, and you will develop your ability to think and act fast. Enter new waters. Sometimes you have to force yourself onto dead ground, leaving stale relationships, comfortable situations behind, cutting your ties to the past. If you give yourself no way out, you will have to make your new daily work. Leaving the past for unknown terrain is like death, and feeling this finality will snap you back to life. Make it you against the world. A fighting spirit needs a little edge, some anger and fear. So do not sit back and wait for people to get aggressive. Irritate and infuriate them deliberately. Feeling cornered by a multitude of people who dislike you, you will fight like that. Hatred is a powerful emotion. Remember, in any battle, you are putting your name and reputation on the line. Your enemies will relish your failure. Use that pressure to make yourself fight harder. Keep yourself restless and unsatisfied. When we are tired, it is often because we are bored. When no real challenge faces us, a mental and physical lethargy sets in. Sometimes death only comes from a lack of energy, Napoleon once said. And lack of energy comes from a lack of challenges, comes when we have taken on less than we are capable of. Take a risk, and your body and mind will respond with a rush of energy. Make risk a constant practice. Never let yourself settle down. Think living on dead ground will become kind of fiction. You won't be able to do without it. When soldiers survive a brush with death, they often feel an exhilaration that they want to have again. Life has more meaning in the face of death. The risks you keep taking, the challenges you keep overcoming, are like symbolic deaths that sharpen your appreciation of life. Reversal. If the feeling of having nothing to lose can propel you forward, it can do the same for others. You must avoid any conflict with people in this position. Maybe they are living in terrible conditions, or, for whatever reason, are suicidal. In any case, they are desperate, and desperate people will risk everything in a fight. This gives them a huge advantage. Already defeated by circumstances, they have nothing to lose. You do. Part 2. Organizational team warfare. You may have brilliant ideas. You may be able to invent unbeatable strategies. But if the group that you depend on to execute your plans is unresponsive and uncreative, and if its members always put their personal agendas first, your ideas will mean nothing. You must learn the lesson of war. It is the structure of the army, the chain of command, and the relationship of the parts to the whole that will give your strategies force. The primary goal of war is to build speed and mobility into the very structure of your life. That means having a single authority on top, a avoiding the hesitancy and confusion of divided leadership. It means giving soldiers a sense of the overall goal to be accomplished and the latitude to take action to meet that goal. Instead of reacting like automatons, they are able to respond to events in the field. Finally, it means motivating soldiers, creating an overall esprit de corps that gives them irresistible momentum. With forces organized in this manner, a general can adapt to circumstances faster than the enemy can, gaining a decided advantage. The military model is extremely adaptable to any group. It has one simple requirement. Before formulating a strategy or taking action, understand the structure of your group. You can always change it and redesign it to fit your purposes. The following 3 sections of this book will help you focus on this privilege and give you strategic options, possible organizational models to follow, as well as disastrous mistakes to avoid. 5. Avoid the snares of group thinking, the command and control strategy. The problem in leading any group is that people inevitably have their own agendas. If you are too authoritarian, they will resent you and rebel in silent ways. If you are too easygoing, they will revert to their natural selfishness and you will lose control. You have to create a chain of command in which people do not feel constrained by your influence, yet follow your lead. Put the right people in place, people who will enact the spirit of your ideas without being automatons. Make your commands clear and inspiring, focusing attention on the team, not the leader. Create a sense of participation, but do not fall into groupthink. The irrationality of collective decision-making. Make yourself look like a paragon of fairness, but never relinquish unity of command. Remote control. In the late 1930s, U.S. Brigadier General George C. Marshall, 1880-1958, preached the need for major military reform. The Army had too few soldiers that were badly trained. Current doctrine was ill-suited to modern technology. The list of problems went on. In 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt had to select his next Army Chief of Staff. The appointment was critical. World War II had begun in Europe, and Roosevelt believed that the United States was sure to get involved. He understood the need for military reform, so he bypassed generals with more seniority and experience and chose Marshall for the job. The appointment was a curse in disguise, for the War Department was hopelessly dysfunctional. Many of its generals had monstrous egos and the power to impose their way of doing things. Senior officers, instead of retiring, took jobs in the department, amassing power bases and features that they did everything they could to protect. A place of feuds, waste, communication breakdowns, and overlapping jobs. The department was a mess. How could Marshall revamp